For the bottom half of the body, I'm using 2.5 pounds of clay. The clay is pre-wedged with a mixture of feldspar, mica, and black specks. So I'm rolling the ball into a cone from wedge, and then I'm going to pat the base of it to make it round, where I don't have any creases that are going to be interfacing with the surface of the mold, the print surface. I'm going to then color up the top of this teardrop into what will be the neck, just kind of pinching, elongating that. The neck is quite skinny. I can just kind of roughly, that seems long enough, so I'm going to now open up the body of this into a bowl. So I'm just pinching. I don't want this to be pinched too thin because I need it to have enough thickness to stretch into the details, but I want it to be roughly the same size as the cavity of the mold. From any clay that is sticking out over the rim of the mold, I'm shoving that back down into the cavity so that I have extra thickness down there. There are 4 feet, and so in each of the foot cavities I have to press really hard to get a full impression and capture all of the detail. As a little depth checker, so if I poke this into the clay and it hits the tape, that's going to make a bigger hole, and that's going to tell me that's the correct depth. So I want the needle to go through the clay and to stop right where the tape is. So once I feel confident I've gotten the detail captured in each of the leg cavities, I'm going to take this clay that has come up above the rim of the mold, and I'm going to kind of push that back down. And the intention of doing this is generally when you are packing clay into those leg cavities, you're going to make it too thin. So now I checked the depth in the very bottom. It looks about right. And then I'm going to work from the body up into the neck. I want to make sure that I have a good amount of compression, and I'm just going to make the neck flush with the mold for now. If you pull too much clay at once, it can tear out. Now at this point, I'm going to take any clay that is sticking up above the mold, and I'm just going to shear it off. So before I get to smoothing everything, I want to just go around with my depth checker. I want to see that I'm fairly consistent. If I have any really thick or really thin spots, that I address those now. It's okay if the tape hits a little bit. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's just meant as a gauge so that you can get a sense of where the leg cavities are and where to push the clay. So now I am pretty good with the depth. I'm going to work on smoothing the interior body, and I'm going to use a red rib like this. You should be able to tell where the leg cavities are even in the final piece. So if those get erased and all you see is just kind of a round curved bowl, those are going to be a little bit too thick. So I'll go back in, just using my fingers, press into each of those leg cavities, and then try and smooth that so that the interior does look easy to clean. I'll now do with a wood rib. I'll come and I'll scrape level with the top of the mold, using the plaster as my guide. As I do the neck, same thing. I'm going to just make the whole neck flush. And then I'm going to use this tool to scrape out the neck. So from the body, I'm going to dig out a channel up the middle of the neck. And as far as the depth of what I'm carving out, the neck is going to be thinner than the body, so you can't really use the depth gauge for the neck. But I want the skinny side of this to run all the way up and through the head, and the walls are going to get quite thin there. I'll switch to the fat end for the bottom half of the neck, and I'm going to try and make the transition of the wall thickness from the body up into the neck nice and gradual. But you can see there the wall thickness is consistent through the body, and as it goes up into the neck, it gets skinnier and skinnier and skinnier. So the last step I want to do is I want to go around just below the rim, and I want to push that wall up so the clay, where it's coming into contact with the top half of the mold, that the clay is sitting bubbled above the plaster, so that I'll get some compression that will help join the two halves. All right, we're moving on to the top half of the mold. For this, I'm going to be using 1.5 pounds of clay. Going to wedge it up. I want to make sure that all of the clay is a homogeneous moisture and softness. If the clay is too stiff, it is going to be hard to get all of the detail in the mold. So it's better if you are starting with softer clay. Again, I'm making my teardrop shape. I'm going to pinch out a neck. All of the starting weights account for some of the clay going back into the bag, but not needing to add more clay as you go. So once I have this elongated teardrop, this time instead of making a bowl, I'm going to punch all the way through and turn the base of this into a donut. And I'm looking to make the hole about the size of the opening for the teapot. And by turning it into a donut instead of just a coil, I avoid any seams along the print face. Face of it, I want to make sure it's long enough that it curls and comes out instead of planting right into the top of the head. When I'm pressing this donut into the mold, I want my thumb resting on the inside right here, so that the clay is going into the channel, which is the rim of the teapot. So I am holding back the clay from squirting into the middle, and I'm pushing with my dominant thumb down into that groove. And it requires going around 2 times, I've found, to get all of the detail of the rim where you don't have any voids. For the bottom half of the mold, it's the feet that require a lot of pressure. For the top half of the mold, it's the rim and the gallery that the lid is going to sit on. Press the middle of the neck from that cavity. I want to make sure that I've found if you don't press hard enough right here, you get a big crease on when you pull it out of the mold. And then I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to swipe it, and that's going to make that surface nice and smooth. I'm going to take my wood stick tool, and I'm going to use the plaster in there as my guide for scraping back the clay. What I want to find is this little edge right here. I want to make sure that that is a consistent thickness above the plaster, and have that be anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch thick. Take the wood stick around one more time just to make sure that that clay is flush with the plaster, and also get double checked that the thickness is consistent. So that's the underside of the gallery the lid sits on, and it is visible once the piece is fully done. So spend a minute to get that nice and clean. So that edge has been addressed. Now I can use my depth tool. I can check the side walls. For smoothing the walls, I can go back to using my red rib, and then I'll use my wood stick tool to scrape the top of this clay flush with the plaster, just like I did on the bottom half of the mold. For the neck, just want to make sure that I have it compressed well up into the head before I start to scoop it out. So I'll take this wood stick tool, I'll scrape it flush, and then I'll go into this tool and I'll carve my channel all the way out through the mouth. The head is kind of deep down here at the bottom of the neck. So I want to scoop a little bit extra right there in the head. So you can use the back side of the tool to smooth the channel without removing more clay once you have the depth right. Same on the tail here. I might scrape the back flush with the outside of the mold. The thickness looks good and consistent. So now I'm just going to make sure that the transition from the body, that wall thickness, is consistent all the way through. One more pass with the red rib, especially as it transitions from the body into the tail and the body into the neck. You can take the sponge and run it down the inside of the neck so that that channel is free of burrs and tool markings. Once I have that, I will go through right under the contact area. I'll push the clay up so that it's bubbled, domed above the plaster, to help make full contact between the two halves of the mold. Now time to score, so I'll use this scoring tool, and I want to score fairly thoroughly along the entire contact surface. You have less and less surface as the clay gets thinner up here in the neck. Score both sides, and then we're going to apply a slip. So at the end of each work session, I take all of the little dry crumbs of clay that I've made and I put them into the slip container, top it up with water so that it's ready for the next work session. All of the larger chunks of clay that start to dry out, I'll put into the scrap bucket. So what I am careful is to not have too much clay on this surface here outside of the cavity of the mold, because I want the two halves to fit together. And as I'm scoring from the inside towards the plaster. I don't want to mar the plaster too much. So just be mindful to try and scrape within the lines. You don't have to be too careful with the slip as far as it going outside the lines. It's thin enough that it will just squirt out. And then the two halves go together. I'll line up the butt of the molds first, and then I'll lean it towards the neck. I'll grab here and pull those together and push down nice and firm. For the next part, after the molds go together, we have to stitch the seam on the inside. So I'm going to use this tool, which is a smaller version of the one we use to scoop out the neck. And I'm going to use the rounded side on the inside, and I'm going to score across the seam line, pulling clay from the bottom up over the seam. And I'm digging in quite deep because I want to make sure that I'm erasing the memory of these being two separate pieces. I want them to be joined so that that crack or that seam no longer exists or reappears. After I've done a deep score with this tool, I'll go in with my thumb and I will swipe parallel with the seam line, and I'm pushing quite firm, and I'm filling all of those little tool mark voids, and more importantly, I'm making sure that the thickness of the clay on either side of that seam is even, so that if you close your eyes and you swipe your finger up and over, you can't tell where that seam is anymore. I've tried getting inside with a rib before, and I find it's too difficult and you can't really get enough pressure. So just a side to side motion with your thumb seems to be the best tool. The last part is this mouth, and this is really thin and it's open so that I can take the pointy end of this tool and I can reach in and I can swipe back and forth across the seam, kind of like you're using a Q-tip in your ear. I'm going to just grab a tiny little ball of clay and I'm going to flatten it into a patty. I'm going to take my slip brush and I kind of paint it in and on the edges. Then I'm going to take this patty and I'm going to just set it on the outside of the mold. My wood stick tool, from the center I'll scrape out, from the center I'll scrape out. This is going to get sculpted more, so if there's a little pit, don't worry about it. Back here, now that I've compressed the two halves, I'm just going to take the wood stick, I'm going to scrape it flush. No sign of the seam. The next part to press after you're done with the body is the lid. We are using 6 to 8 ounces of clay. I'm going to wedge that up, and then my print surface, I want to paddle it, no hard edges. It's just kind of a soft round. I'm going to place that face down. This is the knob of the lid. I'm placing that down, and in the very center, I'm pressing very hard to make sure that I capture all of the detail. After I'm done with that, I'm going to take my thumb on the outside and I'm going to push down and in. I don't want this squirting out further. It's pretty much parallel with the edge of the mold cavity. But I want to get compression. I want to create this lip down here. I don't want this going all the way flush with the mold. It should stick up maybe 1/8 of an inch above the plaster. And after I've gone around, then I'll just take my finger and I'll swipe that outside so that it's smooth and not bumpy and ridged. I'm not too worried about this outer edge as long as it comes out far enough. And then I'm going to hold the top down while my dominant hand presses out. It's important to push down here because if you just push out, the mold halves will come apart. And I'm going to use the round side of my stick tool, and I'm going to use my middle finger to rest on top of the plaster mold. This wood stick tool is going to scrape against the inner wall of the mold, and the depth of this tool creating a fairly flat bottom. So using your finger there to rest on top of the mold maintains a nice consistent depth as you go around. So now I've scraped until this plaster here is clean, this clay wall is flush with it, and now I'm just going to use my thumb and I'm going to kind of swipe so that I'm getting a smooth inside for my lid. I'm swiping in the round as I rotate the mold, and then you can go back to your red rib one more time. And you can use that, and that's our lid mold. Our last mold is the tail. The tail is pretty much solid, and it's going to be about 4 ounces of clay per side. Just going to kind of roll it into kind of a bean shape. And then I'm going to pinch a hole through 1/2. It kind of looks like a pacifier. And then I can lay that into that cavity following the tail. I find by starting with the middle open as opposed to just covering the whole sheet and then trying to scrape it, it's such a narrow or a shallow cavity that if you scrape, it often rips the clay out of the cavity. So now I have it on top and it's bubbled over top of the plaster, so I'll just use my fist to make sure that I'm getting that compression. And then as I go back with this, I want to not try and take too much clay all at once, because that amount of friction will rip it out of the form. So just be patient, take a little at a time. There we go. So that is flush right now. I'm going to do the same on the other side. Create my bean, make sure that I don't have any big seams right in the middle, and then I'm going to pinch